Recorded at Get a Grip Studios in Toronto, Canada. A Get a Grip management production and in association with the Get a Grip on Lighting podcast. Financially supported by the good folks at the National Association of Innovative Lighting Distributors, this is Restoring Darkness podcast.
This episode of Restoring Darkness is brought to you by Evluma. If you're serious about contributing to the reduction of light pollution, go to evluma.com, hover over products, and click on Dark Sky Friendly Lighting. Both the OmniMax and AreaMax lights are International Dark Sky Association certified. The warmer color temperatures of the OmniMax reduce the more easily scattered blue wavelengths, which contribute to glare and sky glow. With AreaMax lights, you get full cutoff, which also means no uplight and a significantly reduced contribution to sky glow. And all of Evluma's outdoor lighting product lines come with dimmable drivers for even more control. If your customer is looking for dark sky-friendly fixtures with energy savings while still meeting the demands of decorative lighting, look no further than Evluma. Evluma, illuminating the pursuit of dark skies.
Welcome back to the Restoring Darkness podcast. Today we're here with Kerem Asfuroglu. He's the founder of Dark Source, a London-based design studio driven by social and environmental values. Following his graduation from, I think that's Weimar University, Architectural Lighting Design MA, Kerem has worked at Speirs Major as a senior member of the creative team for 8 years. Throughout his career, he has won several design awards, including Red Dot, Vox Juventa, PLDC, LAMP, and LIT. Kerem specializes in dark sky-friendly lighting design for urban and the rural public realm. That's an interesting term, the rural public realm. In 2017, he was awarded with the title of Dark Sky Defender by the International Dark Sky Association for advocating for the importance of darkness through design. Some of his environmental lighting projects include the Place Y. Brennan Outdoor Center. He's got some weird names in this thing. Prestine Dark Sky Master Plan. Newport Dark Sky Master Plan. Can you say it for me, Kerem? Cloghordan Eco Village? Clog Jordan. These are too hard. Kerem, welcome to the show. John, how are you?
Very good.
Embarrassing myself here.
Let me just say, my Welsh pronunciation is just about as good as yours, Michael. So I'm glad we got that out of the way.
Oh man, those are tough ones. Like I lived in Ireland for a year, and there was that's tough, buddy. I don't know how you pronounce that stuff. Holy mackerel. Okay.
Sorry, I didn't mean to do that to you.
That's okay. That's okay. I'm going to take it right from the beginning and just say, why dark skies? What do you? There's obviously something emotional here for all of us. What is it for you, Kerem?
Well, that's a really good question. I suppose, got to ask it to every single person because it starts with that individual response. Because some people, the astronomy element really speaks to them, whether it's protection of biodiversity. I've always been very interested in nighttime because I see nighttime as a realm rather than, just a specific time in the day. This is a realm we inhabit, and it's got its own rules. And I was always fascinated with darkness. Hence the reason you can tell that's counterintuitive to call a lighting design practice dark source, but that kind of shows that passion towards darkness, and it's because this issue is not just only environmental; it's also cultural. Hence the reason, as a lighting designer, I'd like to see myself relevant, vital. We're not really doctors, so if somebody's having a heart attack, nobody's going to call a lighting designer. So I was hoping that would be the way to make our practice and profession become more relevant to the modern times.
When I think about the dark sky movement, and I'm just going to say it because I have never said this on the show before. But I'm a dark sky advocate because of the Midsummer Night's Dream by William Shakespeare. There is a different realm at night. There is something different going on at night. That's the best way I've heard it put. It's a different realm. John, take it for John. You asked some questions, man. My mind is blown on that. I love that realm idea.
I can only agree. And the big change in my life was the first time that I moved from the city into the country, into the rural public realm
Mm.
that Kerem calls it. And you realise that it's not just it's not just not an absence of light. There's something else going on here. And the I mean, the things I've seen. We moved from the centre of London. I grew up in the city, so I'd never lived in the countryside. We'd enjoyed it at a weekend, of course, but the idea, we moved to a farmhouse in the middle of the country, and the 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 effect was incredible. I mean, what a change it made to the way that we saw ourselves living in that place. That the dark wasn't just a place that you closed the front door of and you waited until it got light again. That the dark was actually something, and that different place that had to be enjoyed. And also, I mean, what a scary place it can be. The first time we ever, I mean, this time of year, the first time we ever heard deer in the woodland that was at the back of the house, and they were they were doing that belling thing where they're just howling at one another, and you go, "What the hell's that?" Well, that's the dark for you, my friends.
This I'm really enjoying the fact that you guys both actually like the term the rural public realm, because there
Mm.
is an inherent condescending approach from the cities towards the rural areas, whether it's a lit bit of street or a small square. That is still a common circulation area. That's public realm. And it takes actually quite bit of courage and strength to be able to be okay with the level of darkness, where much of these communities actually prefer. So it's clearly a contextual, cultural element to it as well. And like John was saying, it's funny because when I first moved to London, that was in 2011. Nobody really told us about the urban foxes that we have here.
Mm.
Nighttime can be quite. So some of them actually took refuge in our garden. So it sounded like the closest that I can describe is an old woman was getting murdered in our garden. And what's that scream? It's actually urban foxes.
Foxes, wow. The
Yeah.
This idea of and I just love the word realm. I think that's the best description. Because it's a world. There's forces and powers there that are changing over as the dark descends. Um, when you're designing for this from a lighting perspective, let's get technical a little bit here. What is the basis of this? You have the five principles of responsible outdoor lighting that the IES and the IDA put out. I don't know if that's all 100% there. I feel like that's like a white paper or something, or like a direction document. What is it at the basis of this idea of lighting for darkness, or preserving darkness, or night restoration? What is it? What is the basis technically of it? What do you have to do?
That's a great question. I suppose, like any painter or any artist, canvas is the most important thing. So, what darkness and the quality of darkness you have, and the first aim should be to preserve it and restore it if you can. So, the base is a great strength for any visual artist. Whether it's a painter depicting the nighttime or it's a lighting designer working in the night realm or the nightscape, is you have to start with what you have, which is the base canvas as darkness, and then put your layers accordingly. And to be honest with you, it's more of more often I'm finding myself actually it's just trying to go as minimal as possible. So trying to basically the best lighting is no lighting, but
Mm.
there has to be a level of light, because this is the 21st century, and we have to be able to safely see where we're going. But there is a threshold, and if you can, the lower that I can go without having to resort to high levels is the best way. And it's just multiple layers coming together to create an experience. What I'm trying to do with my work is not only try to create less bright precedents, but I'm also trying to create nice places that people would like to inhabit and spend time. And that's how we can ensure that there's social sustainability to this as well. Because last thing you want is to, go as low as possible, but still have results that are intimidating to people. We just want to overcome that, that inherent fear of darkness that we all have in ourselves as well.
Would you like to take a bit? Just a thought that just went across my mind there. Suddenly, we're talking about the rural realm, and we so rarely talk about that. We think about everything is in the urban context, and our rural attitude is one that comes out of that urban context. But I wonder, Kerem, if we can see a flip coming in that, because there is a danger here that we just abandon the city to its light, and we just go on and do it. Just do it, because actually all the important stuff is happening where nobody lives. Tiny little villages, little village greens, because that's where the magic really happens. But are you hearing of any real sense of movement that rural picture, that softness, that intimacy is finding a way into the urban situation?
Yes, and I think that trajectory is actually that the line of travel has come from actually the small communities in the rural context. Who are the people who made this sexy? All this talk about the dark skies, it was small communities, small groups of people coming together to do something about protecting their environment. And dark skies theme became much more powerful through them. And now we're seeing, as you said, John, parts of Greater London authorities considering some strategies to how to implement this. Bigger cities, we're seeing massive multi-million developments are considering this, and this is all thanks to the rural context and small communities actually making this become so big. In that respect, we owe a lot to the small communities, definitely, and I do think the ultimate frontier is actually the cities, because they are the big polluters, they are the big offenders when it comes to light pollution, and until they're really tackled, we have a lot of work to do.
Michael, do you want something?
Yeah, well, I was waiting for you because I felt there was a conversation between lighting designers there that I wanted to just see, shop talk, or I didn't want to disrupt it, but
we'll have that in a minute. Don't worry.
So so what I do, so John's on the design side. I'm a lighting distributor. So when I leave the office here, I go sell light fixtures, light bulbs to people, and it's an interesting different positions of the industry. What I see from my perspective, yeah, you know what? It's getting a little bit nuts, to be honest with you, but
impressive.
Yeah, I'm having a big argument with Amazon right now because I actually sell a lot of stuff on Amazon too. So we're in a big fight, Amazon and us. But that's a whole podcast unto itself. But I'm driving around at night now, and you know what I'm thinking to myself? I think the principle we've missed, or the area that is most fundamental in accomplishing responsible outdoor light at night. I like that acronym. John does too. I know you roll on. That's a nice acronym, right? Like, how do we name it properly? It's so key. So we can restore darkness and preserve it, which is the end result. Responsible outdoor light at night gives us this gift back. I think we have to create outdoor light fixtures and regulate it very simply that you should not be able to see the light source. So when you're driving your vehicle down the road, or you're walking down the street, or you're looking across at the horizon, you should not be able to see the LED light source itself. And the problem with the sky glow, this is what occurred to me, and on the highways and the glare and everything else that's happening, is that if you look at that light fixture, or even if you're looking in that direction, Kareem, you can see the damn light source. You can see the LED array on the wall pack, in the street light, or whatever it is. And if we just made the law, you're not allowed to see the LED light source. You can only see the result of the light, Kareem. I think that is a fundamental change that I think would solve a lot of these problems. And then the color temperature. right? Then lower the color temperature down to 2200 Kelvin or 2700 Kelvin or something like that. And I don't see that anywhere. Have you encountered that? Is that something you like, or where do you feel about that?
Yeah, the visibility of the source is an important topic, and we were just having a conversation, an email thread today with one of communities that I'm working with in Cumbria, the north of England, which happens to have some of the darkest skies in the UK context, and they got some good precedents, and we'd like to propagate the bad and the before and after, what's the bad design, what's the good design, so people can see it in a very clear context. And often with my job works, I can also see is sometimes the visibility of the source is also even if it's easy on the eye, you can always never really almost capture it with the camera, or if you eliminate the source, obviously you get the best lit effect for human eye
Yes.
as well.
Yes.
However, before we get there, there's so much that can be done in terms of, the stuff that you mentioned, for example, the color temperature, the beam distribution, the intensity is another important topic. And, the way I look at it, this is, there's a place for every single light fitting and manufacturer in this realm. And hence the reason I'm always, interested in having broad, wide open arms and having as many players as possible in this, because there are lots of places where suitability is very accommodating, and I'd like to see more manufacturers actually producing dark sky friendly lighting. And I don't necessarily see this source issue as the make it or break it at this point. Maybe we get refined so much that 10 years down the line, that's only thing that is really the greatest concern. Yes, then that definitely there'll be a time to tackle that. But before we get there, there's a lot to improve, and I think the visibility of the source is not terrible at this point. But for example, ULOR, there's a big question about upward light ratio. And again, a scheme can be environmentally friendly if it has, tiny bit of upward lighting. It's just about what are we proposing here? The ground picture is important. What's the overall composition? If you manage to mitigate, light pollution massively, so maybe there's a place for having some sources visible, for example. So I think it's a bit of a push and pull, and I think sometimes people really shoot themselves in the foot by just really trying too hard to comply with extreme dark sky friendly measures, which might be challenging as well, because we're also trying to have some creative freedom for the designers and people as well.
Kerem, I'm glad you said that creative design freedom. I'm having a little bit of a down on science at the moment, because science is getting in my way. And I find myself and my client talking about the emotional effect of light, because scientists hate that, because they can't count it. They don't know where it comes from. They haven't got an emotion meter, so they can't measure it. And I've always felt that one of the issues that we have around outdoor lighting is that so much of it is wrapped up in lighting guides, lighting recommendations, British standards, anyone's standards.
Yeah, sure.
Whereas we know that there are things that can be done, and there isn't a standard in the world that would approve it. But when you look at it, you go, that's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And for you, I mean, Kerem, to what extent is deciding to run away to the country, or Wales as we might call it, means that you actually get out of the way of people who care about standards? Because I sense that there's a little bit more freedom, and there's a little bit more sort of room for delicacy and maneuver when you get out into the rural areas, because people say, well, I don't want a lot, but I want it to look really, really nice. And you go, I can do that. Just don't ask anybody to get their light meter out.
I think you've just actually hit the nail on the head, and probably also reflects on one of the strengths we have in the UK is our standards are not, they're guidelines. Even British standards would start with, these are guidelines, and you can prefer taking them to the heart. What's most important is it gives the designers or engineers a language to talk, so we can understand each other when we refer to, the X standard, Y standard. So we know what baseline where communication starts. But often what I find is I always try to go as low as possible. So it requires a lot of negotiation with the local authorities and the county councils, whatnot. So it's just, at the end of the day, these people are responsible from other people, whether it's urban or, rural public realm. So you have to give a level of confidence and trust in them that you can afford to have low light levels while still ensuring safety. And that's my job, to negotiate that, communicate it between the parties, and try to secure the best deal we can get. And argue, further reductions after curfew, whatnot. But as long as it is reasonable. So one of the best ways, over the course of the years that I found works best is just implement a test. In Pristine, for example, one of those many difficult Welsh names that you were struggling with, Michael. It's an aspiring a town. Hopefully, we will submit our application in the new year. We're hoping to become a dark sky community, which is going to be the first one in Wales. Why Wales is so important is 18% of Wales is under protected dark skies. This is, one of the biggest, percentage of dark skies per country. And dark sky community is not a concept that yet is in Wales. There are lots of, reserves, parks, sanctuaries, but community is the ultimate precedent that we're trying to establish, because it's towns and people need to get from A to B, still need to live their lives. There, like, for example, I live in North London, right? And over the lockdown, they just basically refurbished all our street lighting, where we had really nice, pleasant, warm, white and soft illumination. Just all over the course of a night, it just became white LEDs, very crisp, very glary, very bright. And nobody ever consulted us. And but the funny thing is, for example, I don't know how it works in the US, but in the UK, for example, if your neighbor is building up a shed or like extension, you would get a letter from the county council saying, or the local authority saying, would you want to comment on this? Like, do you have a problem with this? Why would I? I will never ever see that. I will never experience that. Let that person have their shed. Interestingly, nobody consults you when it's about lighting, and it's such an invasive.
I'm going to interrupt you. That's because, I'll give you an example, regulations you're talking about. Okay? The vast majority of street lighting in the entire world used to be 2200 Kelvin. It was HPS. Okay? And we designed towards HPS. We used HPS. The CRI was crap. The color was actually environmentally quite friendly. We didn't even know that. Somehow it's the color of fire itself is actually the best light to use at night environmentally, as funny enough as that is. But you know what? People just said, we're not using that color anymore. We're going to use a totally different color. But the regulations didn't say anything about that. You know what I'm saying? Like, hang on, we were using this color for years and years. John, I'm going to go, John. But, I mean, how come, where are the regulations when you need them, right? Like, John, go ahead.
I've always taken a rather more cynical view to the economics of street lighting, because the reason that we were using sodium lighting is because it was the cheapest source available. The cheapest source available before that was the high pressure mercury lamp, which was an ice blue, remember, and occasionally you'd see some fluorescent tubes, remember. And before that, we didn't hardly had any light at all.
Okay.
It has always been the case. And almost look at it, it's almost, we look back in fond memory of light sources where we couldn't tell the color of a motor car. because it was gentle, and it was the color of romance. No, it wasn't. It was brown. And all that's happened is that we've gone again for the cheapest that we can get. And the problem that we've got now, I'm on a soapbox, guys, if you can't notice that. We had very, very good light sources, and we had some average to appalling light fittings. And for my friends out there were some very good light fittings as well. But generally speaking, the magic was all in the light source. You bring in the LED, you have no idea. You have no idea whether you've got a fitting that's got a decent LED in it, or it's got a piece of tat in it. If you buy cheap, you have a 4,000 to 6,000 Kelvin cheap LED. These local authorities that we've got here think that they've got a 25-year installation. It's never going to work.
No, come on.
But it is
why do
going
they
to be
think?
rubbish.
Well, I mean,
Magical thinking, Michael. Magical
it's
thinking.
magical
And
thinking.
and they've got a contract, which of course the company that no longer exists will honour
Yeah, for sure.
in a few years' time when they all fall apart. Sorry, that's Kerem. I'm sorry about that.
That's absolutely fine. This is the best forum to really vent out that space. Like,
yeah, sure.
No, I for my sins I loved sodium, and as you said, that there's a nostalgic quality to it, because
Sure it is.
much of my childhood street lighting that I've ever recognized was just basically sodium. It was the industrial reality becoming the public reality, because as you said, it was very reliable and efficient. So not only it was cheap, it was also consistent in the quality. As you mentioned, we didn't have the same diversity as we have with the LEDs. And of course the LEDs coming to power, because I remember in early beginnings of 2010, when I was just starting off as a junior lighting designer, we used to specify all sorts of products and fluorescents or metal halides, where if you needed to have the projection and intensity, LEDs couldn't do that at that time. I clearly remember that the LED was an interior lighting tool that was kicking off, but then over the course of only 4 or 5 years, that the LEDs took over massively and they captivated our imagination. And still, they are the most versatile lighting tool we ever came up with. But maybe one of the problems when it first came into picture, because the lumens per watt that you can get was such an important thing for people, and longevity was unmatched, and we dropped everything and just like moths we got drawn to light. But now we're understanding the lumens per watt is not the issue, and it comes at a cost. We do understand even going for warmer temperatures when there's a slight deficiency, which is we're talking about now these days 5%. It used to be 20%, but it's getting much better. And now everybody's understanding, it comes at a massive environmental cost and impact, and people are factoring that in. What could think about the a couple of other things, that sodium we were talking about also, you're right as well, how we now understanding, Michael, that the sodium was such a great source in terms of not only color temperatures, also the spectrum as well. Now we're understanding
there's no blue. There's
out.
no blue in it. There's no there's no blue.
Yeah, and also we're understanding now there are lots of insects or species that are actually they hate high CRI, because that's our luxury to have all these vibrant colors at night. The nature doesn't give a damn about it. Absolutely, and that's why it's about us getting what we need with the perfect compromise for all stakeholders, including the biodiversity. But I'm going to also quickly go back to British standards, where I was just going to say, here we're lucky enough to British standards are good at accommodating, allowing you to go as low as you can in comparison to some other standards. So had you been, for example, in Germany or Denmark, you'd be stuck with, you can't really negotiate the standards. That's very difficult. It is what it says in the textbook and you have to follow it. But here we have the luxury of making arguments and agreeing with people and saying, this is the best for our case, and let's go with it. And it allows us to go as low as possible in comparing to European standards as well. So for example, European standards don't really tend to like when there's mixed traffic use, for example, cyclists combined with pedestrians and vehicular traffic. Immediately they go no, you can't drop a certain level. So British standards, still there's room for negotiation as long as it's a slow-moving traffic, it's a single carriageway, or if it's pedestrian use only. So there's room for subjective, interpretation, if you will. One last thing is, I was suggesting the test element to really prove to people what you're trying to do. Is with Pristine, we've done a test and left it there for a couple of months, and we just basically invited people to come back to us with their thoughts. And not only the large majority actually, subscribed to it and loved it. it also, they were consulted. They felt like they were part of this journey. Nothing was imposed on them. That's my piece. Sorry.
No, I couldn't agree more. And like, I just have so many things written here. I'm going to pick one here. Okay, so when you were speaking there, I wrote down 6 different things. But I'm going to start with captivating our imagination. I think the darkness restoration movement is beginning to captivate the public's imagination too now, actually. You see it everywhere you go. It's the momentum of the movement is getting more and more powerful. And and so what you see is that humans can change extremely quickly. This idea that humans are so slow to change and that's all from people who are bitter and resentful that nobody bought their damn product or bought their service or something. It's like, you're crap, nobody bought your crappy service. But you know what? In the last 20 years of my life, I've seen a lot of things change super quickly, actually. From the entire province of Ontario having HPS to it almost all having LED except for the city of Toronto. That's a lot of infrastructure change really, really fast in 10 years. From going from landlines and fax machines to computers and smartphones and artificial intelligence, humans will adapt very quickly. We need to captivate the imagination, Kerem. We need to make it clear that these things that we're doing at night are offensive to the realm. They're insulting to that place of darkness. And that doesn't mean that we don't want responsible outdoor light at night, but that we have to elevate that priority. And I think if the industry can do that, if we can do that, it's going to set off the biggest lighting design boom in the history of the world. Everybody's going to start to buy into this. And the key point that I'm going to add on this, John, is that if we change focus away from climate change and energy efficiency and lumens per watt and bean counters, and we move over towards darkness restoration, dark skies, light pollution abatement, we'll be in the realm that we can actually affect best. And we'll give them all the energy savings, all the lighting controls, all the circadian and climate change that we can, because darkness restoration is about energy savings. It's about using less. And using less not just by lumens per watt, but also by putting the appropriate amount of light where it belongs and controlling it. And I think that's where the focus change, that's where that captivation of the imagination comes from, Kerem. And I think we can do it.
Yeah, I think there's a great appetite for dark skies than it's ever been. But equally, we find ourselves in a funny place in time as a society or civilization. We've never consumed more light than we are doing right now. We're producing and consuming at a rate that is that was unimaginable if you compare it, to what's happening.
Not possible with Javon. We couldn't have our electricity. One of the things that I always say is not just the cost of the LEDs being cheap, it's also the circuit capacity that we opened up. Like, I don't know how the electrical works in Britain, but you have like 15 amp, 20 amp circuits in Canada. Well, now guess what? You can put a double, triple bullhorn on your outdoor pole and 2 lights on each horn going every direction, when before you only had one 400 watt HPS. And now you got 6 LED light fixtures. The capacity of the circuits allows you to put more lights as well. It's not just energy, yeah.
So true. There's something called the... Go on, John.
No, okay. I just very briefly, if you're lucky, there are so many directions that this is being pulled in. And Michael, I think you're right. It's this idea that we have to legislate against the thing that we need to legislate against, and we haven't got the imagination to realize that if we just do the things that we want to do, we get to that place not by accident, because we're trying to produce something which is magical and mystical and safe at the same time. And for that, we do not need loads and loads of lumens splattered around all over the place. At the same time, living in the same village, there will be that person who will put the LED floodlights in their garden. And they're not only lighting their garden, they're lighting their next door neighbor's garden. They're lighting a field that's a mile away because they can. there's a kind of a yin and a yang here going on. And Kerem, one of the things I wanted to ask you, so I'll ask you now, is where is the pull on this one? Are you being called in by community representatives first, or or is it actually the local authorities who are saying we need to do something better here? And because I know that most of the local authorities no longer have any street lighting or any lighting engineers at all. So
Yeah,
they're
it's
having to look to the industry.
yeah,
Go on.
true. It's a mixture. It actually started as the bottom up, which is the grassroots of working with communities who wanted to achieve something, and by just the sheer goodwill of starting, advising them of like how to mobilize themselves, because this is a lot about community building and community mobilization,
Yeah.
because you need, wherever you are, whether you're in a very remote town with small population or it's just a big city, you just need to have the head count. You need to build up your team, and that's why what's so beautiful about this moment is it's just you cannot be everybody, and you need resources, you need other people to feed into that. And that also refers to what you were saying, Michael, which I found very interesting, is that there's so many layers to this topic. And whether we were talking about what is the insect population decline, whether it's like the impact on human health, but I found it that depending on which authority or the community that I'm working with, that just tweaking that language depending on the priorities of the job, it always works the best.
Mm-hmm.
And more I'm finding the local authorities and counties, they are responding to, as you said, the carbon emissions and the energy reduction element much more than
Mm-hmm.
other things.
Mm-hmm.
That doesn't necessarily mean they're completely discarding what the other
Mm-hmm.
elements are. It is an easy win for them that they can flip over very easily, because there's a
Mm-hmm.
narrative attached to it. They can immediately say, we've reduced 10 tons of CO2 by just dimming our lights. It's just as simple like that. And the beauty of light pollution is just, in comparison to the other types of pollutions like air or chemical, it's the easiest one to rectify. You switch it off
Mm-hmm.
and it's
It's off.
gone.
It's gone.
And the improvement
Yeah.
rate is imminent.
Yeah. But it's an enormous problem, Kareem, light pollution, and then it's getting worse. And it's interesting. I actually I mean, if you happen to stroll onto that online realm called Twitter, okay, which I'm warning you against, okay, I do it every now and then, a couple times a week. I go on and I look at different things, and it seems like everybody's in some kind of chaotic argument where if you don't agree with me, you're an idiot. What I've found is actually that most people are reasonable and most people will listen. You know what I'm saying?
That's very true.
And they'll hear you out, and they may not agree with you. They may not decide, they may not be able to be persuaded or convinced by you. But it's your obligation to persuade and convince, and not to threaten and attack and insult. And I like the darkness restoration movement, or the night preservation movement, whatever we want to call this, dark skies, to remember that we want to avoid politics like the plague. We don't want this to be a conservative issue or a liberal issue or a labor issue or a Democrat issue or Republican issue. We want to avoid all that. And I think if we aligned as an industry, Kareem, that, you know what? If you do the darkness restoration when you're outside, or you do dark skies, you actually get all that other stuff too, at the most effective way to get it.
That's so accurate. That's bang on, in the sense of, there's so many layers, but I think the communication is the key.
Mm-hmm.
How are you opening up to that portal is the key, because I've seen so many communities who were also dabbling in trying to do something, but the communication was a bit harsh, and maybe it didn't allow the framework to grow. So maybe it was looking from a very narrow point of just astronomy, or just biodiversity. So you have to really open your arms. But that's again why I see the key strength of the small communities is coming from the fact that they can come together and mobilize very quickly, because they don't need to negotiate with a local authority to the same extent, where you're in a city, you have so many stakeholders and just one borough or council. So it is very difficult to push the boundaries, because it's also, you have to have a bureaucratic finesse as well. And as you said, look, goodwill goes a long way. My experience is, for example, any job you're working on, there's definitely an industrial estate, whether it's a small town or is it a big city or whatnot. There will be always some big estates that require or consume more light than an average street does. So there are thresholds where you'll have to find the best way of approaching communicating. And what I often find is just often these people didn't really think or knew about the negative impacts of light pollution, or they didn't even know that they were causing light pollution. But that's 10 out of 9, I would say. There'll be 1 out of 10, there'll be that really difficult guy that
But you know what, before John, I just want to comment, and then I'll throw it over to you. But the fact is that all you lighting designers out there, the Restoring Darkness podcast is only 2 years old. Okay, the International Dark Sky Association has been around for a long time. Okay, but they just started to cooperate with the lighting industry 3 years ago or something like that. The lighting industry and the International Dark Sky Association used to hate each other's guts for decades.
Yeah, I think there was, but there could be a good reason for that. And that is, it comes back to something that we said right at the beginning, and that's about glare and brightness, and using those lovely metal halide lamps and those lovely sun lamps and all of those. Hey, they came with one huge package of light, and if a lamp is as big as your fist, there's only so much control you can put into that. But if we've now got something that is tiny, it's that big, and you can hide it, that becomes a conversation that's worth having between the people who want to keep the skies dark and the people who want to make lighting safe for people. So it may be that I
actually don't think they want to make lighting safe. Okay, I'm going to comment on that. Like I've done a lot of podcasts, and I liked your boss is Mark Major, right? Or one of the partners at your firm is Mark Major, right, Kerem?
No, used to be. I used to work for Speirs Major, yeah.
Okay. So I just interviewed Mark. Yeah. I just interviewed Mark, and he did. He was talking about the same thing as the canvas, and right, like just because you want lighting to be safe doesn't mean you get to paint off the canvas, buddy. Like that's kind of part of the argument here, that the lighting industry has introduced new technologies that do things quite a bit differently, John, and they may not be violations of the regulations, but they're certainly not in the spirit of good lighting, and we need to convince the lighting industry of that. Like the lighting industry needs to be convinced of that.
I was just going to say before I was interrupted.
Cut off.
The thing that the LED has given to us is flexibility. We can do so much more now. And I am wondering, and I'm all sorts of other conversations that's just floating around, conversations that we've had with people where they've been saying it was the opportunity to take a small urban space and light it in a different way so that people could see what we were doing. And Kerem, that's what you're saying. And let me say, some of the photographs on your website are the best examples that I've ever seen of what we are talking about here, about being able to control light and keep it tight, and it looks so good. And I wonder whether we need to, we're in the, we're just getting into the winter. We've got all kinds of activity going on around community activity on keeping people warm, finding safe spaces for them. I wonder if we've actually got in potential here a sort of a guerrilla lighting approach, that if we can find communities who are prepared to work with companies who might be prepared to sort of take on a smallish kind of job, almost as a test piece for them, as a demonstration piece for them, because they can't afford a showroom. Whether we can actually achieve some of this lighting in a way which is not commercial, but it's meant to be permanent. A whole new approach to it.
Interesting. That's interesting.
Look, sounds fantastic, and that was one of the reasons where I left working for a commercially successful brand, and just tried to look at this from the grassroots approach. How do you
Mm.
come off your high horse and actually look at the things, look
Mhm.
upwards and try to mobilize these people? And one of the inherent DNAs of Dark Source, my lighting design practices, that is driven by social and environmental values. The visual is important, but it's not the most important. Visual
Mm.
comes later, and because we've been part of the problem until now. We've been looking at lighting as a means of enhancing wealth and adding further value to the properties or spaces that can afford to throw money into the business, and only then they were deemed valuable enough to actually be blessed with this profession. But now we're seeing a serious shift in terms of not only cultural but also moral. And as you say, John, it makes
Mm.
perfect sense to me. That's why when I left my previous practice, I've done a small soul search for myself, and my wife was very accommodating and said, look, why don't you do your thing, because you're clearly having an existential crisis.
Mm.
and um, and and I went to Africa, Gambia, to deliver a training session for 30, 40 local electricians, training them about solar power and lighting design. And then we worked together to deliver lighting for a community library that was 24/7 accessible. So because kids don't really have any luxury of having studying spaces and whatnot. And that completely transformed my approach towards design and my individual perspective of things as well, because on the very, very last day when we installed everything, it was such a fascinating experience working with these brilliant young men and women. They were amazing, how talented they were, but they never had the opportunity to rise up to this point. Nobody ever brought that knowledge, and they just basically devoured that knowledge, and they went
Mm.
above and beyond. And all these electricians came up with some amazing skills. On the very, very last day, when we're taking the final photos of that project, which won several awards later, and what was very interesting is we've done the photos and we stepped outside. Obviously, it was a solar based lighting scheme. And the power cuts are very common in the town. And we realized the power had gone out in town, and none of the kids studying in the library didn't even realize it. And that was my first-hand
Wow.
experience after 10 years
Wow.
as a designer, that
Wow.
how imminent design can improve lives. And I've never had that touch when I'm working with really luxurious prestigious brands, or like places that will be beyond closed doors that maybe only the elite will experience. That means nothing to me now, and this is
Mm-hmm.
why I would encourage all designers who have the able mind, the able
Mm.
body, go and help your communities and mobilize
Mm.
them, and you will find it will reward you down the line, which is what's happening with Dark
Mm.
Sources portfolio and reputation, is that we're not looking at this from the client and value perspective. We're looking at
Mm.
this about how do we help the community, and how do we take their hand through this and make them achieve what they want to do, not the designer's ego here. This is about
Mm-hmm.
listening to people, understanding and accommodating them. And there was one more thing that I would like to also touch on, Michael. You were saying about the IDA and the Lighting Designers Association and whatnot. And as a person who's always been friendly both with the lighting community and IDA, and I still intend to manage it that way. But I think it is true in the sense of, I think neither of these communities were ever right to come to table and understand that they need to cooperate, because I'd argue that large majority of lighting designers still to this day, I see lots of precedents. I don't think, even if they're promoting themselves as environmentally friendly, I think it's not there yet. But the culture is definitely as overview of understanding what anti-light pollution or what light pollution does. There's a general consensus, but I wouldn't say the quality of work is across the board. And I think in the same way IDA was, they've recently changed their motto, and they're saying now, we're not going to let the perfect get in the way of the good. And that's a very important change of culture, because they are ready to increase their area of influence and try to get as many people on board as possible, rather than only focusing on perfect conditions, perfect collaborations. They're opening their arms, and there now we're seeing way more collaborative effort going in, and people are trying to leap further collectively than they individually can. But maybe it was for the best that, in the past, maybe these communities were meant to be a bit reserved. Maybe the time wasn't right. But as John was saying, the technology is right, the culture is right. Everybody's, thinking and knowing the actual facts and thinking quite similarly. We've never been closer to each other than we are ever now. I'm also talking about, within the Dark Skies movement, there are lots of really prominent figures, like for scientists, environmentalists,
Sure.
researchers, physicists. Previously, they would have been anti-light, period. But now they're also, as much as we're informed, they're also informed that is not possible unless you want to, cast people to a dystopia. So we'll have to work together to find the right balance.
And can I just add on a tail end
Sure.
of that?
Yeah, sure.
I think we've all the time we have to look to see where the pressure points are, and to see where, if those pressure points can be used to our advantage. And we've got a pressure point in the UK, and it is very much a rural situation, Kerem, because it's all about bats. Yeah, it's not just about dark skies. It's about bats and small mammals and even plants and flora. We're being told that we've got to do less and less and less on one hand, but on the other hand, we're still being told that we've got to put good quality lighting in. So it's not, on one hand, you say the regulations say we can't use any light, but now you're telling us we've got to use some light. So somewhere in that little space possibly is somewhere where we can go and say, this is an answer for you. And it's an answer maybe that you wouldn't expect to have seen before, because this is not an answer that any of the technologists would have considered. But we can do this.
Yeah.
And we need to get those examples out there as quickly and as many of them as we can.
And I think one thing you said there's really powerful to me is there's always, you know how it is, John, like there's always a bit of an kind of, I don't know, would you say argument that, there's the designers and the engineers, and they just look down on each other. It's just one of them is beautifying the things. The engineers, you don't know what you're doing because you're just looking at this from a visual perspective, embellishment perspective, where the designers are, you guys don't have the design sensibility. But interestingly, with Dark Source and my journey, I had really great respect for engineers than I ever had as a designer, in the sense of having to work with the limited layer is such an important power, if you know how to actually get into that. Because Dark Skies movement comes with lots of restrictions. Like, we all know that the uplit trees look really beautiful, but trees don't like it, and then you can't do it because that's the oldest trick in the book. Every tree looks beautiful when it's uplit with uplights, but you can't be doing that, and you have to stick to those principles.
Or shut it off at 10 o'clock.
Well, you can't
shut it off. Don't run it all night long. That's part of the problem. Is it's it gets dark here at 4 o'clock, and so the guy's got his trees lit up on the front lawn. It looks great. Well, shut it down at 8:30 or 9 o'clock. What do you need it running all night long for? That's the other issue with all that.
Yeah, well, here's the other thing is also, when you have limited room for maneuvers, and it can be quite crippling for a designer, because the amount of layers that you're used to is you'll have to reconsider it, whether it's you can't be doing this, or you'll have to consider measures such as you said, switch it off after a certain time. You'll have to come up with aggressive techniques. But I think, what I found very liberating is the amount of, how liberating that it can as well be if you respect those core principles and in some capacity, and always show a sensible, reasonable approach towards trying to find the best compromise here. And people will find that actually it is very rich, and it's got lots to offer. It's very diverse. It's not like it's just two-dimensional. That's not the reality. And I think designers will need to also improve upon that as well. They'll need to work with less to appreciate more, if you see what I mean.
I love your call to return to the commons. This is a tragedy of the commons, what we're talking about, the light pollution. And I love your call away from the siren, the exclusive project where you're made to feel so great that you're involved in this space that only elite people go to, or something like that. And then John saying, well, why don't we return to the small town? Why don't we use a small town as a showroom for our or something, some way to go back to the people, and this idea of persuasion and convincing and working. Like you said, I don't fight with electrical engineers either. I usually respect what they do, Kerem. You know what I'm saying? Like, I don't do that job. But I just love that idea, and I think we need to stay on that idea that we have a responsibility to persuade people. People do not have a responsibility to do what we tell them to do. As an industry or as a movement or even politicians, you got to convince people. That's your job, actually. And you do that with facts, with honesty, with dialogue, admitting when you're wrong and when you've made a mistake. And I think, it's a good place to call it. We do that by admitting we're wrong, maybe is the number one, when we make a mistake. And the lighting industry has made a lot of mistakes. And I have sold a ton of light polluting fixtures, okay? I am raising my hand right now. I am a light polluter, okay? was part of the problem. And I made a lot of money selling outdoor light fixtures that were 5,000 Kelvin and light polluting and everything else. But I'm here to admit that I was wrong in that time. And I think we now know that we can change and we can do better. Kerem, any final thoughts before we close it out?
Yeah, I think you paved the road nicely. I think we didn't know large majority of what was causing light pollution, what its impacts were, but now we know it, and we still have an idea about how severe the situation is. And like, for example, satellite imaging cannot really detect, it's not very sensitive towards blue light, but now we're understanding, and lots of people working on that in terms of like coming up with some countermeasures and stuff. So the situation, we are only understanding the severity of the situation, and we didn't really connect insects, bats, whatever, with the impact on biodiversity or pollinators. 10, 15 years ago, it was just only known within small circles. But now we know and understanding it a bit better, we have no excuse that we can't keep the way that we used to be. And as you said, it is okay to change. It's okay to adapt to things, and it's okay to have made mistakes in the past, as long as we don't keep doing them. And thanks for giving me this platform. It was lovely chatting with you guys as well. I really enjoyed this chat.
Our pleasure. Yeah, for sure. His name, and I'm about to butcher the last part of it, but is Kerem Asfuroglu. Can you say it, Kerem?
Asfuroglu. That was close enough though.
Okay. And his company is Dark Source, and you can check him out at dark-source.com. He's also on Instagram, LinkedIn, and Twitter, and Facebook at Dark Sourced with a D on the end. Kerem is first and last name. You can look him up on LinkedIn, and Instagram is at Dark Source. And you've made it to the end here. Like I always say on all the podcasts I do, we don't have listeners. John and I just have colleagues that don't do podcasts. So thanks for spending some time with us today. Have a great rest of your day. Take care.
Look no further for dark sky friendly products than Evluma. Since its first product launch, Evluma has carried one or more International Dark Sky Association certified models. If your customer cares about light pollution, suggest the OmniMax with shielding or the AreaMax with full cutoff to reduce uplight and glare. Evluma, illuminating the pursuit of darkness.